He says he's not ready for anything serious, but he doesn't let you go. And every time he comes back with that familiar text, that quiet glance, that casual, "How have you been?" something in you lights up and sinks at the same time. One part of you wants to believe this time it could be different. The other part, the deeper, older part, already knows the ache, because this isn't the first time he's pulled away, and it won't be the last. You start to wonder if maybe it's because you were too much, too emotional, too open, too hopeful. But what if it's the opposite? What if it's because you touched something in him he wasn't ready to see? What if you didn't scare him off? You stirred something sacred, something buried, something he's not yet whole enough to hold. I'm not here to give you tactics. This isn't about seduction. It's not about text timing or playing hard to get. And it sure as hell isn't about shrinking yourself into something more acceptable. This is about truth, energetic resonance, archetypal depth, and the kind of psychological insight that doesn't just change how you date, it changes how you exist. Because there's a reason he keeps coming back. And it's not because you're convenient. It's because on some unconscious level, you reflected his soul back to him. You didn't just remind him of connection. You reminded him of himself, the version of him that wants more, feels deeper, hopes harder, even if he won't admit it. And that reflection? That's not something a man forgets. So if you're caught in that cycle, the late-night texts, the almost connection, the wish that it meant more than it does, you're not crazy, you're not alone, and you're not powerless. Because this isn't rejection, this is initiation. And what you do next, that's where your real power begins. Carl Jung once said that every man carries within him the image of the eternal feminine, what he called the anima. Not the woman standing before him, but the woman inside him, the archetype of connection, intuition, vulnerability, emotion, the soul itself. And here's where it gets profound. When a man meets a woman who embodies something close to this internal image, not in looks or behavior but in essence, he doesn't just feel attraction. He feels awakening. But awakening is not always welcomed, especially by the parts of him still tethered to control, performance, and freedom disguised as avoidance. So when he says, "I don't want anything serious," he's not always lying. It's the voice of his conscious ego speaking, the part that wants space, logic, and autonomy. But when he comes back, that's not the ego talking. That's his unconscious responding to something deeper. Because you didn't just remind him of a good time. You mirrored back a part of himself he hadn't integrated yet. That's why he can't stay away. Let's talk about projection. In Jungian psychology, projection is when we place unconscious parts of ourselves onto another, good or bad, and relate to them not as they are, but as they symbolize. You've seen this before. The man who falls in love with you quickly, but then can't hold the connection. Not because you changed, but because the spell wore off. It wasn't you he was in love with. It was what you awakened in him. The dormant part, the sacred longing, the emotional self he spent years suppressing in favor of being strong, successful, unfazed. He returns because something in you cracked through that armor. You didn't have to perform. You didn't have to prove. Your presence did it. And here's the tension. His soul is pulled to you, but his psyche is split. He wants closeness, but feels suffocated. He feels safe with you. But that safety scares him more than chaos. He senses the real thing, and it terrifies him, because the real thing requires surrender. You see, for a man to truly commit, I don't mean perform commitment, I mean soul level, stay in the fire with you commitment, he has to go through what Jung called individuation. It's the process of becoming whole, integrating the hidden parts of himself, his emotional self, his softness, his longing for connection. It's not a path of romance. It's a path of confrontation. With his shadow, with his fear, with the feminine within. And most men have not taken that journey. Not because they don't want to, but because they don't even know it exists. So when he meets you and you unknowingly awaken that internal anima, a woman who isn't chasing, isn't demanding, isn't performing, but simply being, his nervous system recognizes it before his mind does. He feels it. In your silence, in your eyes, in the unforced way you make space for his truth. That's why he returns. Not to the relationship, but to the experience of himself that he felt in your presence. That's what you gave him. And he doesn't even know it. He thinks he's just not ready. But what's really happening is this. You're standing at the threshold of his evolution. And that threshold feels like death to the ego, the death of his lone wolf identity, the death of detachment as safety, the death of numbness disguised as independence. You didn't scare him off. You summoned him toward himself. And he's not sure how to walk through that door. That's the unconscious battle. That's the paradox. And that's the real reason he says, I don't want anything serious, but still wants to be near you. Because the part of him that fears commitment is the same part that yearns for transformation. That's why logic won't solve this. That's why chasing, persuading, withdrawing, punishing, none of it works. You're not dealing with logic, you're dealing with symbol. Your presence isn't logical. It's archetypal, and he feels it in his bones. Not because you played it cool, but because you were real. You didn't offer a performance, you offered a mirror. And that's why he keeps returning to the fire. Because even if he says the same old words, I'm not ready, I don't know what I want, I don't want to hurt you, there's something in him that already knows. You saw the part of him he was still trying to forget. And that memory, it lingers. This is the psychological truth no one teaches women. Men don't return because they've changed. They return because they've remembered something. And sometimes that memory is you. Let's talk about the rhythm. He pulls away, then he returns, then he pulls away again. You start questioning your worth, your timing, your tone, your truth. But this isn't personal, it's patterned, it's symbolic, and every symbol carries a message. This dance you're caught in, it's not random. It's an ancient echo. It's the push and pull of psyche and soul. It's the myth of the man at the threshold, caught between the forest and the fire, between freedom and feeling. And here's the key to understanding it. He's not just avoiding you, he's avoiding what you reflect. Because when you entered his life, you didn't just arrive as a person. You arrived as a threshold image, the moment before change, the flicker of something ancient in a modern form. To him, you're not just you. You're the moment before the man he could become. And standing at that edge, it's terrifying. That's why he pulls away. Because closeness with you doesn't just feel romantic, it feels symbolic. It feels like surrender. It feels like the beginning of something he can't control and doesn't yet understand. You see, the masculine psyche, especially in a man not yet initiated into emotional maturity, is built around containment, control, clarity, and above all, certainty. But your presence doesn't offer certainty. It offers depth. It offers reflection. It offers being seen. And that is both intoxicating and destabilizing. Here's what's really happening. He returns to you. Not because you're convenient, but because you're familiar to his unconscious, not familiar in the usual way. Familiar like a dream he half remembers. Familiar like a feeling he had as a boy, before he learned to shut it down. Familiar like the warmth he forgot he was allowed to want. That's why when he's with you, he feels alive, even if he can't say it. Even if he doesn't understand it, you are not a checklist to him, you are a soul memory. But here's the paradox. His body returns, but his words do not. Because his ego hasn't caught up with what his soul already knows. Let that sink in. This isn't a logical mismatch. This is a temporal gap, a split between awareness and readiness, between recognition and integration. You're not imagining the connection, but you may be misreading the timing. His return is real. The feeling is real. But what he does with that feeling, that's where his work begins and where yours ends. Because your job is not to interpret his confusion. Your job is to stop internalizing it. The most dangerous place for a woman to stand is between what a man says and how he behaves. Because in that space, that liminal zone, her nervous system starts to fragment. She starts making up stories, trying to decode contradictions, blaming herself for what feels true but isn't named as true. But the truth is this: you don't need closure when you understand the symbol. When he says, I don't want anything serious, and then sets the date, touches your arm, looks into you for a second too long, that's not mind games, that's emotional dissonance. He is caught, not by you, by what you mirror. You mirror the warmth he's afraid to trust. You mirror the feminine softness that tells him he doesn't have to perform. You mirror the silence between his words, the space where his soul still breathes. And here's where your power lives. You didn't imprint him by being perfect. You imprinted him by being present. Not performative, not strategic, just present. And presence, to a man who has lived on the run from his own heart, is like oxygen. He doesn't know how to ask for it. He doesn't know how to keep it. But when he gets a taste, he never quite forgets. That's the imprint. That's why he remembers you, even when he's with someone else, even when he's pretending he's fine, even when he's gone silent. Because you didn't offer him performance. You offered him a felt experience of himself. And that's something no logic can erase. Here's what no one tells you. Men don't fall for who you are on paper. They fall for who they feel like in your presence. Not how you dress or speak or text, but how they feel in the energetic field you create. And when you're anchored in your worth, when you're calm, undemanding present, you become the mirror his unconscious craves. That's what he keeps coming back for. Not you as an object, but you as a reflection of his own dormant possibility. Now let's pause, because I want to speak directly to that part of you that's been doubting herself. You didn't imagine it. You weren't too much. You weren't mistaken. You just met a man who wasn't ready to see what you reflected, and that's not rejection. That's resonance without readiness. That's soul memory without ego integration. So what do? You don't try to prove the connection. You don't try to fix it. You don't try to shrink yourself into something more palatable. You remember this. The memory he keeps returning to is not what you did. It's how he felt when you weren't trying to make him feel anything at all. That's your power. And it doesn't need convincing. It needs honoring. If this message is hitting something real inside you, pause for a moment and hit like. It's not just for the algorithm. It tells me and the world that you're done pretending and ready to see with new eyes. And if you've ever felt alone in this kind of emotional spiral, drop the word truth in the comments so other women know they're not the only ones waking up. Because you're not alone. You're just awakening. And the connection you felt, it was real. But it wasn't just a connection, it was a symbol, a threshold, a mirror. And now, it's time to step back from the symbol and reclaim your center. Because there's a difference between being the mirror and losing yourself inside his reflection. This is where most women lose themselves. Not in the heartbreak. Not in the absence, but in the trying to earn his clarity, trying to decode his silence, trying to wait it out, long enough to finally be chosen. And I get it. When a connection feels deep, ancient, soul level, walking away feels like betrayal, not just of the relationship, but of your own hope. But let me speak a truth here. No man becomes more available because a woman tries harder. He doesn't find clarity because you loved louder. He doesn't commit because you gave more. He doesn't awaken because you waited patiently at the door of his ambivalence. In fact, the opposite often happens. The more you perform, the more he retreats. The more you chase, the more his fear is confirmed. The more you bend, the more the tension disappears. And without tension, there is no transformation. You see, the moment you abandon your center to win him, you stop being the mirror and become the mask. And here's the hardest truth of all. You cannot inspire devotion by collapsing. You cannot create transformation by trading your dignity for breadcrumbs. When you abandon yourself, when you punish with silence, overgive in desperation, or beg for clarity, you are no longer reflecting his potential. You are reflecting his fear. You are confirming the very reason he runs. Not because you are unworthy, but because now you are asking him to carry both of your wounds. And that's not attraction, that's anxiety. So let's reclaim this, because this is not about fixing him. This is not about waiting until he's ready. This is about you choosing yourself without needing him to validate that choice. Let me say this clearly. You are not here to heal him. You are not here to mother him, teach him, or guide him into readiness. You are the mirror, the interruption, the sacred reflection of what he could become, but only if he chooses the path. Your role is not to drag him down it. Your role is to stand in your own truth and let that truth magnetize what is aligned and release what is not. Because the deeper feminine doesn't chase. She calls, not with her voice, but with her field. Your field, your energy, your clarity, your presence, does more to awaken a man than any words you could ever say. But only when it's anchored, only when you are no longer waiting, only when you're not subtly shaping yourself into the version you think he'll finally choose. Let's talk about the dignified feminine. She doesn't beg. She doesn't withhold. She doesn't perform softness, hoping to be rewarded. She is soft because she is strong. She is still because she is sovereign. She is magnetic because she knows who she is and what she's not willing to betray in herself for love. She speaks truth without needing it to control the outcome. She says, I value our connection, and I also desire commitment. If you're not there, I respect that. But I also won't linger in a space that doesn't match my heart. She says it with peace, with breath, without drama, because her worth isn't on the line. And that changes everything. Because when a woman owns her worth at that level, a man doesn't feel manipulated. He feels called up, not guilted, not pressured, invited into a higher frequency, into his mature masculine, into his own sovereignty. You see, a man only commits from freedom. But freedom doesn't mean absence. True freedom means the power to choose. And when you stand in your clarity, lovingly, without fear, you become the kind of woman a man must rise to meet. And if he doesn't, you don't shrink. You bless the lesson and move forward. Because you were never trying to win him. You were trying to remember yourself. Let's be clear about something. The feminine doesn't need to control. Because when she's centered, she creates the space where all things are revealed. That space, that stillness, that dignity is what Jung called the field of individuation. Where one soul meets another, not to be completed, but to be reflected, awakened, witnessed. That space does not require both people to be perfect. It requires one to be present. So even if he doesn't choose you, even if he stays in confusion, even if he never comes back, you win. Why? Because you didn't betray yourself trying to convince someone of your worth. You stood, you breathed, you told the truth, and you let love become an invitation, not an investment plan. Because here's the deepest truth of all. A woman who knows her worth doesn't beg to be chosen. She chooses herself, and that choice becomes a memory he never escapes. He didn't pull away because you were too much. He pulled away because you were the first to reflect his soul back to him. And he wasn't ready for that kind of mirror. You didn't just awaken desire, you awakened memory. A forgotten language of connection that his body recognized long before his mind gave it permission. He doesn't miss your texts. He misses who he was becoming in your presence. The part of him that softened, the part that hoped, the part that saw, maybe for the first time, a life beyond detachment. But that life requires death, the death of control, of avoidance, of ego's grip on certainty. And not every man is ready to die into that kind of love. Not yet. That's not your failure. That's his edge. And the only way he'll ever cross it is if you stop standing at the threshold, holding the door open with your pain. Don't ask if he's thinking about you. Ask, what did I awaken in him that he hadn't yet found in himself? That is your imprint. That is your power. Because love isn't about being chosen. It's about choosing yourself so fully, so quietly, so powerfully, that those who are ready for real can find you in the stillness. If this spoke to your soul, not your ego, not your fear, but the part of you that knows, then like this video, share it with a sister, and subscribe. Because this space is for women who don't want tips, they want truth. And if all you did was reflect back his potential, if all you did was hold that mirror with love, if all you did was remember who you are in a moment when you could have forgotten, then you won. You didn't lose him. He found you. And that's the love that never leaves.